So, have you had a particularly difficult time hearing the voice of wisdom this week? Am I the only one? I don't know, but this week there have been so many times where I've just kind of thrown up my hands, maybe in holy sense of humor this week. You see, when we planned this series, it was a long, long time ago. And when we planned this, the scriptures were chosen well in advance. We planned this earlier, but what we didn't plan for was coronavirus. And so last week was all about breath. We talked about how spirit and breath are the same word in both the language of the Old and the New Testament. We delighted in the interconnectedness of our breath. I just love that Polynesian understanding of ha, that spirit, life, breath, and that we would inhale together as a greeting. But this week, that has seemed scary, right? The fear has been escalating. Sharing the breath of life? No thanks. We don't want to breathe anywhere near to anyone. We are afraid of our neighbor's breath, or maybe we're afraid of sharing something in our own breath that might be harmful to our neighbor. So rather, in delighting in our interconnectedness of this breath of life, we've begun to fear breath or touch or even touching something that somebody else has touched. And this isn't completely irrational, right? This is kind of the reality in a world where an infectious virus is making its way across the globe. So last week was all about breath, and now that has kind of been the root of our anxiety this week. But this week, as the anxiety is ratcheting up, our theme and scripture, which we chose a long, long time ago, was about listening for wisdom. That has been really, really difficult this week, sorting through all the competing voices. Which of this is fear and which is reality? How do we respond? What should we do? I have been listening really hard this week, praying for wisdom, listening for her voice in the midst of the cacophony of voices. And the scripture that I have been sitting with this week says that wisdom is crying out to us. She is not whispering. What a contrast with that still small voice. Wisdom in our passage from Proverbs today is shouting on the street corner. Wisdom is a street preacher. Really? How do we discern her voice from the other loud voices? The wisdom way of knowing is a different way of knowing. It's a more holistic way of knowing. In her book, The Wisdom Way of Knowing, Cynthia Bourgeault reminded me this week that wisdom understanding takes thoughtful discernment, and all of this thoughtfulness and discerning is not completely analytical. It can't happen in our minds alone. It can't happen in meditation alone. It can't happen in work alone. It requires our whole being brought into balance. In the wisdom way of knowing, there is no shortcuts, there is no cheating possible, because in the words of the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, how you get there is where you'll arrive. The practice of Lectio Divina, then, is a really good practice on the road to getting there. This divine reading is a simple devotional practice, reading the words and then sitting with them, listening to what might come up, journaling. But this is also a wisdom tool that can help us to discern and develop our own holy imagination. So I'm a person that I can totally geek out on Bible study. Like, I love word study. I love tearing it all apart. I like to look at the context and the historical setting and the culture at the time. And that can reveal a lot of meaning when you engage the words in this way. I've discovered a lot of meaning that way that I otherwise could have just overlooked. But sometimes I find that this geeking out can also get in the way of me just hearing the wisdom of God. Lectio Divina is a really good practice then, because it involves just sitting with the text and listening for the voice of wisdom. I think that sometimes revelation comes to us not in the original intent of the writer, but in the way that the Spirit translates the words for us. In the proverb that we read today, the Hebrew name for wisdom, Sophia, is Hakma. So in Proverbs, this Hakma, Sophia, wisdom, takes on many different roles and characters. In our passage from today, she is like an Old Testament prophet crying on the streets, encouraging the simple and the scoffers to gain deeper understanding. In the book The Grace of Sophia, Grace G. Sun Kim writes, "Wisdom is to be found at the crossroads of life, calling upon human beings to recognize her presence and receive her words, which are life to those who find them." I was thinking that this week, especially in all of this limiting of face-to-face interaction that's going on right now, our street corner has kind of been taken online. Platforms like Facebook sort of become our virtual street corner, but a news feed is a really confusing place to listen for the voice of wisdom. It feels kind of like I imagine it would be to be standing in Times Square and being bombarded by all of the messages and the people and the voices that are around you. This week has been crazy. This week, my virtual street corner contained everything from voices saying that this is a complete hoax and that this is all political and that there's nothing to take serious here, to people that are inciting panic, causing people to rush out and stock their shelves with supplies. I don't know if wisdom is crying out, but this week I think she must be crying. If wisdom is crying out, she must be easy to miss. If we want to hear the voice of wisdom, we are going to have to kind of cultivate a little bit of quiet. And this quiet has to be quiet of internal voices and also external voices that allow us to be able to hear. I was thinking in this listening for the inner voice of wisdom this week that my inner wisdom must be using her inside voice, a voice that requires a different kind of listening. But our passage from Proverbs today says that wisdom shouts in the street. In the public square, she raises her voice. Above the noisy crowd, she calls out. At the entrance of the city gates, she says, "How long will you clueless people love your naivety? How long will fools hate knowledge?" In one of my Lectio sessions with this passage this week, I thought, oh, Sophia is a mom. I mean, I can relate to that feeling. Does anyone hear anything that I'm saying? How many times do I have to tell you? How loud do I need to be? If wisdom is crying out, why can't we hear her? What gets in our way? Have you experienced times when you've been unable to hear the voice of wisdom? I think that sometimes the voices in our head can be too loud, and these voices can come from shame or regret, and that can keep us from hearing. Voices of judgment or self-doubt, voices of fear. Maybe somebody that you trusted told you a message that was life-limiting, and that gets in your way of hearing that voice of wisdom. And then on top of all of that, there are the voices in the world that cause so much fear. And we are no stranger to those voices this week. What if the voice of inner wisdom is crying out to us, standing on the metaphorical street corners of our hearts and crying at the top of her lungs, waiting and wanting for us to hear? What would she be saying? Now, sometimes words come to me when I'm contemplating questions like that, and maybe that happens to you too. Sometimes these words that come to me are from Scripture, but I've never been a memorizer. I'm a word girl and I'm not a number girl, so I have a really hard time remembering specifically where to find these words. But I'm really thankful for search engines that can get me in the right place so that I can discover the wisdom that's been revealed to me in this way. So when I was thinking this week about wisdom and about community and safety and about responsibility and our neighbors and about coronavirus, the words that came to me were God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And in the gift of these words, I experienced the voice of wisdom. We are facing things that are very scary, for sure. And we are also not created for a spirit of fear, but for power and love and self-control. What wisdom for such a time as this? Now, clearly, the context of the letter to Timothy was not coronavirus and global pandemic. That's not something that they even knew anything about. And so, if I was only using my analytical head, I could have thought, well, that probably wasn't what he was talking about here. And I don't know if this is really something I can take from this. But I think that these words helped me to find a deeper wisdom. The context wasn't as important as the message that was given to my heart of wisdom. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control, which is incredibly wonderful. Because sometimes when we do not allow fear to guide us, we operate with self-control in love of our neighbor. And that means that even if we are not personally fearful of this virus, we will follow containment guidelines in a way as a way of loving our neighbors who might be more vulnerable than we are. This also means that we will buy only what we need of the essentials because we will know that these things are also essential for our neighbors. I mean, I'll admit, I've been fearful this week. This situation is like none that I can recall living through. And my feelings have been on a bit of a roller coaster this week. And I don't think I'm alone. We've witnessed both the extremes of underreaction to real threats and overreactions out of fear. I went to several places this week searching for a bottle of hand sanitizer just so that there could be one available here at worship this week, and the shelves were completely empty. And as I witnessed this, which was so bizarre, my heart was also breaking for those who can't afford to stock up on the necessities and find the shelves stripped bare when they come looking for just what they need today. Wisdom is calling out to us, and it might seem counterintuitive in our individualistic Western culture where everyone seems to be out for themselves. But if we listen, wisdom is calling. And I think that we can hear that we are all connected and that we are all one. In the efforts to flatten the curve of the spread of this virus, we realize that our health and our safety are directly connected to that of our neighbors. Now, this isn't something new. This is actually always true. Our health and our safety are directly connected to our neighbors. But oftentimes we have an easier time overlooking this on issues that only impact certain groups and not others. Wisdom shouts in the street. In the public square, she raises her voice. Above the noisy crowd, she cries out. And this week, what she has said to me is God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. What a gift. So I'll ask, what has wisdom been saying to you this week? How do you go about tuning yourself into that voice of wisdom? How do you set aside the noise that gets in your way? What have you heard this week? Welcome to the conversation.